Hello, everyone, and welcome to Delightful Dissent. It's episode 78 today, and our guest is Monica Ferrer Alberti, who's a copywriter, ghostwriter, content strategist, and coach. So, yeah, thank you very much for joining us on the show, Monica.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's it's great to have you here. And today we're going to be talking about the idea this is how you write. And I think this is a really big one for me. Like historically, certainly, there have been, I was taught very strict rules about language at school, and there are still a whole load of people sharing these really strict rules about language. And I think they can get in the way of us sharing and writing content and just expressing ourselves. And for me, a lot of the best writing I've ever come across doesn't follow any of the rules. So I think it's a really, really interesting topic to explore more. And so, yeah, so if you happen to be new to the show, though, Delightful Dissent is really a shared exploration of something people kind of take for granted or don't think about so much. So I hope the show gives you some specific ideas that can help you in your professional life and perhaps your personal life. But perhaps more importantly, I hope it gives you ideas about how you can go out there and challenge some assumptions yourself, because I think that's something that we all should be able to do and we all should be doing more regularly. So, and the show is called Delightful Dissent because, yeah, we are maybe going, arguing with some of the conventional wisdom and going in a different direction. But it's not about just changing other people's minds. It's about exploring all of the possibilities and having fun whilst we do it. The show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if there are any technical issues or interruptions or anything. And please do be aware that there's the possibility of strong language if that's an issue for you. And there's also the possibility that we may be talking about some difficult topics. The most likely topics in this particular show are likely to be around neurodiversity and perhaps the experiences of being neurodivergent at school. So if that's a particularly difficult thing for you, then please just take whatever steps you need to keep yourself good. Um, there aren't any perfect answers here. That's absolutely not what the show is about. It's really about exploring and asking questions. And so if you happen to be watching live, then please do ask questions in the chat and we'll get to them and then maybe even bring them into the conversation. If you're watching or listening to the recording, then we'll be sharing information about how you can get in touch with both of us at the end of the show, as well as all that being available in the show notes. So yeah, Monica, I mean, you first reached out to me on LinkedIn, which was really great, and around the dyslexic thinking skill,
hmm
and we got chatting about being a dyslexic writer, which I think is something we kind of both have in common on some level. Um, and I was particularly struck when we had a chat about how good you are at really getting to the heart of things, getting to the point of the matter, and I thought it'd be lovely to have you on the show. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. But maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit in your own words, please.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you in this podcast today. So, as Matthew said, I am a copywriter, ghostwriter, and content strategist and coach for LinkedIn content specifically. So, what I do basically is work on content creation for people to build their own brand on LinkedIn and get clients from that network. And to do so, what we work is in their communication and obviously their writing skills to get the message that they want across to their audience to get the results they want. So that's how we connected to start all of this adventure that has brought us here today, and how we started talking about how to communicate, right? How to write well, what exactly does that mean? And for me, at the end of the day, it comes to thinking about the idea that you want to communicate, and either something will be well written if you get that idea across, rather than focusing on these strict rules that you were mentioning. I like to focus on getting these ideas or these ideas across to the person that is actually reading you.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I just wonder what is it that brought you to doing this particular kind of work? Because I think it's a really interesting thing, and particularly as as a dyslexic. Well,
Mhm.
but in general, how did you end up doing this kind of thing?
So funny thing is, I used to work as a lawyer for a long time, and I did see a lot of efforts from the lawyers that were my partners or my colleagues in trying to communicate effectively really complex concepts, because law works with very uh, complex terms, to attract clients, and absolutely failing at it because they were trying to follow all these strict rules or all these type of power words that they teach us at law school to pretend to maybe sound smarter than actually making your communication clear. So during my period as a lawyer, I identified these weaknesses maybe on the communication skills that some lawyers can have in the written form, especially. Also, it's not something that they don't want to work on, but just something that they learned how to communicate in this complex way, and how it's supposed to be in that uh, sector, right? So all of that brought me to question myself in many ways and how I communicated myself. So I started learning about copywriting with each technique to write, to engage an action from your reader. So started studying about all of that, and that's what brought me into the journey of then becoming a writer that tries to simplify complex concepts for everyone to understand.
Mm, I love
That
that.
was
I
a
think
long
that
answer, but
no, that's a great answer. I think the complexity is one of the really interesting things, and there's another thing for me. It makes me think, there's a way that lawyers use language that isn't the way that isn't really about communicating something. Um, it's a very formal way of communicating, particularly like the words mean very specific things.
Mhm.
And there it's actually it can almost get in the way of some of the other ways of communicating when you have a really formal language. I see it with techie people, IT people, and it's like if you've learned a programming language, it's actually
Mhm.
quite hard sometimes to be like 'cause everything is so fixed, and the ways that lawyers use language is often very precise, and it has these defined meanings, and it must be very hard to break out of that.
Absolutely. It's almost impossible when you're still in the industry, because it's just the way they have to communicate amongst them, and it's the way you are supposed to communicate. So trying to break out of that style makes you not the proper lawyer or not the proper writer, which is a bit the same question that we initiated at the beginning.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I think we should get back to that one about in a bit around like what like the ways that each profession communicates. That's a fascinating idea. But before we get into that, I like to ask everyone to bring a quote. And have you got something you'd like to share with us about this?
Yes, so the quote I decided to share with you today is from Winston Churchill, and it says, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, it's the courage to continue that counts."
What is it that made you want to bring that particular quote? What made you, yeah, want to share that one particularly today?
So it's a quote that I've like had in my mind for a long time, and I think I resonate a lot with it. Also related to the dyslexia, growing up and learning how to express your ideas and opinions in this standardized form that we are supposed to do in order to write well. Meaning that whenever you succeed, it's not going to be forever, so it's not going to be final. If you fail, it's never going to kill you either, or it's not fatal. You can always bounce back, right? And the bouncing back, it's what actually makes you strong. And this is a skill, I think, as a dyslexic you learn from a very young age, because you encounter a lot of these failures uh, at the beginning of your life. I can see
Yeah,
you
I get.
nodding, so
Yeah, I guess making mistakes with language and failing to get yourself understood You're failing to make yourself understood.
Mhm.
That's definitely a thing. For me, I think there's all sorts of aspects of my language that yeah make it very hard to get meaning over, get myself understood. And I think part of the reason I got so interested in words and language was to mitigate that, to make sure that I could always make sure that I could get my intent made clearly. I could express myself really clearly, so I didn't get misunderstood. Because I had some really
Mhm.
difficult experiences, I think, as a child, when I was, and even as an adult. So yeah, no, it's definitely it's a really, but I think that trial and error thing is a really lovely idea, and particularly when we're making content, when we're sharing things for other people. It's like, yeah, we make mistakes in how we put stuff across, and you kind of have to. I think being being too afraid of making mistakes can prevent you from ever getting anything out there.
Yes, absolutely. You need to accept that there is gonna be mistakes and just roll with it. Accept that it's part of who you are, part of what makes you valuable, and concentrate on all the positive things that can come also from these mistakes and try and um, minimize the negative part of it.
Hmm. And it makes me think, particularly linking back to what we were saying a minute ago, that if you've got used to a very formal way of writing, where there is a specific way, whether that's, legal language, whether that's programming, whatever
Mhm.
it is, there's a right way and a wrong way, essentially, is the idea that you can just try stuff out and see if it lands, how it works, if it actually, and even if it feels right for you, let alone anyone else. I think that itself can be quite a scary idea for people and a difficult idea for people to get used to.
Mhm. For sure. Because at the end of the day, it's exposing yourself and who you are and how you actually think or see things. So, getting that out there in front of an audience, no matter the size, even if it's only your family, it can be scary.
Yeah, I think for some people it's scary just to see what they create. Certainly for me, when I first start anything new like that, is like it's just scary to see myself doing it first, let alone anyone else.
Your fear of yourself rereading yourself, right?
Yeah, that fear of being seen, and I
Hmm.
think that that with that fear of self-expression, it's a big thing. We're
Hmm.
particularly, again, I think I relate it to the neurodiversity, but I think it's wider. A lot of people learn that actually being themselves is a slightly scary thing, and they
Hmm.
can't necessarily show up that way. So yeah, that's a real challenge for people.
Absolutely.
So if we actually kind of link this back to the assumption, this is how you write. I
Hmm.
think, we've mentioned the way that there are very precise, um, like technical areas where there are strict rules about how you write. But do you see this as broader than that? This shows up for me in a lot of places. I wonder, do you see this message? Where does it show up for you?
So for me, it's like how they taught us to write when we were in school, which is the Oxford or Cambridge proper way of writing and expressing yourself, which sometimes is using a slightly complicated word that could be substituted by a simpler one only to um, add to the beauty of the text or add to the beauty in the sense of who is reading it, but maybe not in the sense of actually getting the message across. That's what I said at the beginning, right? So breaking through these rules and understanding that actually you can write in a different way and it will also be good writing, for me was a big realization and a big shift.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the strange things when you look at all of the strict rules that we're taught at school about how to write and how few people actually follow them. and how hard, like
Mhm.
how stilted and unpleasant writing that follows all of those rules actually feels.
Mhm. And how all those rules can actually be learned by a machine, and that's how we all write right now. And I'm not even talking about AI, but about spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes that can be corrected by the word uh, text corrector that's been used since 20 years now, maybe, I don't know. But all of these will be no longer, we no longer need to learn these to write properly, because um, the standardized form is already adopted. So now we need to understand how to write to actually stand out from these norms.
Mm, absolutely. And I mean, like fixed spellings for things has only existed for about 250 years, certainly in English. I don't know about in other languages. But, you know, since it was really maybe a bit longer than that, that it was like starting to be an idea. But with the first dictionaries, you know, which is only the 17th century, it's like that's before then everyone just spelt stuff how they how they so the idea that language requires even fixed spellings, you know, is like, well, actually that's a
Mhm.
kind of recent invention in terms of we've had written language for going on for what, 4 or 5 thousand years, I think, off the top of my head, quite a while, and it's only been in the last few hundred that we've had fixed spellings. So it's like I think this idea of like we need these specific things to be exactly right to get our meaning across. That's what really bothers me about this. Is like if you can convey the meaning and there are a couple of spelling mistakes, it's great that there are tools that can help us. But even if there are a couple of spelling mistakes, as long as you
Mhm.
convey the meaning, it worked. You know, and I think that for me, that's the thing that bothers me more than, you know, it's this idea of like people who are there are a lot of people who seem to get very upset about really arbitrary rules, particularly, you know, I think of like the split infinitive, which doesn't affect meaning at all. It's just
Mhm.
it's entirely an aesthetic thing. It's perfectly grammatically allowable beyond the fact that some people don't like it. And it's like, and this is a rule now. It's a very strange thing, and it can be really useful. You know, it's a really helpful form sometimes.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
think there's something in that about like they can be like a lot of these things that we think of as language rules, they're much better thought of as guidelines at best.
Mhm. Yes, and the proof that they are not strictly necessary is that when we learn another language and we still do not follow all these rules because we just are unaware of them, we still manage to communicate with the person that's speaking that other language, even though our grammar is not perfect, our spelling is absolutely a disaster, but they still get our message and understand us. So that's the exact proof that they're not strictly necessary, all of these rules.
But that's the funny thing. It's like learning different languages. It's when you come across a whole like bits of features of a language that don't exist in another language or that do, and you're like, it's a very strange thing. I mean, I think you speak more languages than I do, and like there are quite big differences, even in some of the, you know, the European languages that I know that are like where they're where you're like, it just doesn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly for me, like learning Italian. Italian's a very efficient grammatically language in a lot of ways. It doesn't have a lot of the formations that other
Mm-hmm.
languages have. And so you're just like, oh, you just express it that way. Danish is the same actually. And it's like, and it's just like, we don't need all of these slightly related forms. You can just say this and your meaning still gets across perfectly fine. So I think
Mm-hmm.
even more than that, even if you're not mangling the language, the fact that you know, whole groups of people, millions and millions of people manage to communicate completely successfully without whole bits of language that we
Mm-hmm.
might think of in our native language as being completely vital.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the language that I speak that has the most amount of rules that I cannot even start to understand would be French, because I think it's the most complex in terms of grammar and or like spelling. And the simplest one for me, it was always English. English was just much easier for me to learn as a dyslexic kid because I learned it when I started learning English when I was 3 years old, um, than Spanish for sure, for instance.
That's really interesting. I mean, I have no frame of reference for what it was to learn English because it's my first language. So, um, but I always think, that it's funny how different languages have different aspects of like, for me, one of the things is there are so many different words for very subtly different things in English
Mm-hmm.
that can be really, really difficult for non-native speakers, and actually are quite difficult for me in terms of conveying nuance in other languages, because I'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
isn't there another word that means slightly a similar thing but not the same thing? And people, no, no, it all means the same. It's like you've just got this whole word and you convey the meaning in different ways. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that whole way that different languages, convey the subtleties
Mm-hmm.
fascinates me, and they can be really, really different. I know you're right. I think French is very, yeah, has these very long, florid, complicated sentences to to
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
to achieve that. Whereas in English, we might just choose a slightly different word.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Only the way in which they count it drives me still crazy in French. So English, it's much simpler. It's true. To nail the message you want to get across, you need to have a lot of vocabulary because it's these type of words that give you the exact nuance. But then in
Mhm.
terms of grammar in spelling, like you only have three tenses for verbs. That for me was a liberation coming from Spanish that has, I don't know, I think it's 8 or 9 tenses for each verb. So um, and again, because at school they teach us by memorizing, so you had to memorize each of the tenses and how to change them for each of the verbs, and that was just an anxious part of my learning process for languages, which I didn't have to experience as much with English because it's just simpler.
Mm. And it's also funny, I think the funny thing is when the first our first language we learn, and then thing if we're born kind of into a bilingual situation, we don't really think about language and the rules.
Mm-hmm.
When we learn as like, teenagers or as adults, we think about all these language rules and all these formal rules, but we don't when we speak our native language. It just sounds right or it sounds wrong. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a really interesting thing. I came across this thing in English that there are quite strict rules about how we sequence adjectives
Mm-hmm.
in front of a noun, and we always consistently follow them without realizing. And it's such a strange thing. If anyone's interested, just look up adjective order in English,
Mm-hmm.
because you'll be like, when I came across it, it just blew my mind, because it's like, yeah, we consistently follow this really complicated hierarchy of which order we put these things in before a noun, but we don't think about it at all. It's completely unconscious for almost everyone. But if we don't do it, it sounds really weird. And
It's
I
so
think
fun.
these other rules that just sound odd, it's a
Mm-hmm.
very interesting, and it doesn't affect the meaning at all. It doesn't affect the like, it works perfectly well and it fits all of the formal rules, but it still sounds odd. And it feels like there's this relationship between the kind of style and
Mm-hmm.
like formal rules, which is another big part of this how you write thing. And style in particular is a really big one for writing online, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. But it's true what you're saying. Many times I'll know how it's written, but I'm not going to be able to explain to you why it is written in that order or in that way. And I think that comes a bit also from the way of learning that we uh, develop growing up and trying to learn all these rules that make close to no sense to us when because it's true. They're just, if you ask why the rule is like this, it's just because someone decided that it was
Mm.
going to be like that. So yeah, that's how I think I covered the space of not being able to understand why the rule worked in a certain way by just learning by repetition. So I'll know how to apply the rule without knowing that I'm actually applying the rule that's correct.
And it's such a blurry, these things that become these formal rules. It's like, particularly with, it was less clear in British English, but in American English, it's basically just Noah Webster wrote it all down and decided.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if there's any difference between American English and British English, it's usually Noah Webster who wrote the first American English dictionary, and like all of these rules. And it's so some of it's completely arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
I think this idea that we have to follow these rules to make ourselves express ourselves can really hold people back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's unfair to someone else who might express the same idea but through a different road or a different way. Um, why are they not allowed to do it in that way if the idea also comes out and gets transmitted, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, I definitely think I think differently. And part of my difficulty is I want to express that, and it does come out in a different order sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out slightly differently, but it's still perfectly understandable. It's a very different thing, and I think that can be a real challenge as well. It's like, and I guess there's another side to this, which is who are we actually trying to be understood by? Who are we writing to? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of the idea of there being rules around writing feed into this idea that there's a single universal, there's a correct way to write,
Mm-hmm.
which just isn't true. We have different ways of communicating in different circumstances, right?
Yeah, and what's gonna be good writing for you might not be good writing for me because I'm gonna read it and I'm not gonna relate to the story, or I'm just not gonna follow the argument that the person is expressing in that writing. So it's an art. So you cannot have a universal criteria to decide what is a good frame and what's not. So why do we have it for writing, right?
Mm, absolutely. So how do you approach kind of exploring this with people? Because I think this is, it's a really difficult thing to unpick all of the conditioning and how did you approach this yourself? Was this I'm kind of making the assumption that this has been a thing you've had to explore and learn yourself to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had to unlearn everything that I learned. So at first at school, we struggled to learn everything, and then you had to unlearn again everything because it's clear that in social media, um, what's not working, it's the classic way of communicating with these words, adverbs, and using passive voice to make the text more redundant, or all of this is just not going to work on social media because we like reading things that are direct, that are not giving 10 laps around the same idea but straight to the point. And that was a big learning process for me, but something that I loved because I kind of relate much more of to this way of communicating than the way of communicating that we learned growing up. So the journey was actually a liberation of being able to write and considering that what I was writing was good without following everything that I learned. So it was like removing a big backpack from my back and finally being able to write how, not however I wanted, but much more closer to how I would naturally write my thoughts than I ever did before.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds, yeah. It makes me think, particularly when you mentioned passive voice. I spent a lot of time in academia, and there's, academic writing is very very much in this
Mm-hmm.
space as well, and you make me think about business writing and this. It's like it's horrible to read.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to read, and I think that's one of the big challenges with this, and particularly, one of the funny things about LinkedIn is this meeting point of business and social media. The very
Mm-hmm.
instant, quick, personal communication that we're used to on social media, and then this formal, kind of slightly stuffy, slightly obtuse way of writing in business. And the
Mm-hmm.
meeting of those two can be a very difficult thing to to figure out how to proceed.
Yes. But what I've seen, at least from my experience, is that maybe also because my clients come from legal backgrounds, some of them, or from very regulated backgrounds, is that they are so in the extreme of super formal writing that the effort is to bring them down to the informal social media kind of writing. So more than finding the middle, it's bringing them down a lot to then being maybe at the middle. If you.
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting point, and I think this idea of having this formal, having a formal writing, whatever it is, and actually how do we play with that? How do we unlearn that, or some of that,
Mm,
where it's getting in the way of us communicating and connecting with people? Because I think for me that's one of the biggest things is, it's and I'm particularly speaking of academic writing here, it's supposed to remove the personalness. It's
mm,
supposed to appear objective. I mean, there's a philosophical question about how possible that actually is, but particularly in the social sciences, which is why we've moved in a slightly more different direction in some places. But it's supposed to be impersonal. But then that means that the reader has no one to relate to.
mm. And the reader will have a harder time engaging or mm, understanding what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess we're so good at human minds are so good at relating to others. We're always thinking about other people and trying to fig so if we don't use that part of people's thinking, we're making it harder
Mm-hmm.
for them, actually. We're making it harder for them to read and
Mm-hmm.
understand what we mean.
Yes. That's one of the things I also love from writing for LinkedIn or social media is that one of your goals is to make it easy for the reader. And me, as a person who is dyslexic, who struggled reading for my whole life, especially long form and typical writing, when I manage to read content so easily and I kind of get the idea first thing whenever I read content, that motivates me to write more towards this type of writing than the old type of writing, right? Because it means that I will get my message across to loads of people that have my same experience, which is a
Mm.
high motivation thing for me.
It's funny, I've read a couple of books about ADHD written by people with ADHD, and they're so different in terms of how they're formed. Like with someone who knows how to get their message across to the audience, and like, short sections and nice clear stuff, and it's so much easier. I love that model. I think I'm definitely really similar, actually. I'm sensitive
Hmm.
to writing that's hard to assimilate, hard to get in. It's hard, particularly hard for me, and so I try not to write that way.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because I guess this is what the rules are about. When people say this is how you write, the intention is to make it easier to understand on some level, I suppose. I'm not entirely sure about having that. I mean, it does
I
other things as
guess
well.
I guess in a way, even if it's harder for some people, the original idea behind making the rules was if we all follow one same rule, we will all understand that way of communicating, which is unnatural because we are all different. But at the time, it might not have been seen like that.
Mm, mm. Yeah, which is an interesting thing, is like what, makes me think. actually ask why does this rule exist? Is it a useful rule right now? Is a really helpful question because there are so many
Mhm.
of them. Yeah, I think if you try and follow every single rule, you wouldn't write a word, struggle to write anything. Um, but thinking like, why is this a thing right now? Do I want to break this? Is this, is this a helpful thing? Because I use a writing checker, like a grammar and writing checker all the time.
Mhm.
And I ignore it quite a lot because I know what I'm trying to do with the words. I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, I know, thanks. Yeah, I know that's a long sentence. It's intentionally a long sentence. It's like, it
It's
needs to be a
totally
long
a long
sentence.
sentence.
Yeah, it's like, or yes, I know I've started three sentences with exactly the same word. That's deliberate.
Mhm.
It's like, um, and it's like, I think sometimes it can be really about knowing what using that does. Why would you do that? Why would you write that way?
Mhm.
And I guess that links to knowing what you're trying to do with what you're writing as well.
Yes, what really helps is having a goal whenever you're writing something. So if you have a clear idea that you want to communicate and why you want to communicate it, it will make these styling issues easier for you. Because at the end, what you are mentioning is a matter of style. It's not incorrect, but it's just my style, or I want to make an emphasis on this word, so I'm going to reuse it 5 times in the same paragraph, and that's absolutely voluntary. But for you to be confident enough to not follow the rule that the grammar checker is telling you, you need to have done this previous exercise of understanding your goal and your way of writing.
I like that. I think that's a really important point. So how could people start to explore that, particularly I think the goal is part of it, but yeah, how could people start to kind of explore what a useful way of writing for them is?
For me, it's to start writing, to first get over this fear that you were saying, which is something I never thought about, but it's absolutely true of writing and reading yourself. It's really scary. And that's the first step into discovering how you write. So, yeah, there is no other way. You need to write and then see how you write.
Yeah, I think for me it's interesting because I sometimes writing with an intention, but knowing I'm probably not going to actually use it in this way, as like it can be quite useful to be, okay, I'm gonna try and create something for this. And I do
Mm-hmm.
this with speaking and video as well. When I was putting together this podcast for the first time, there are things where I was just trying it out that were, and I kind of thought, I don't think I'm ever going to share this with anyone, and I haven't ever shared it with anyone. I think it's probably deleted now because it did what I needed it to do. Um, and I think there's also one of the things we pick up from school, perhaps, is that everything we write needs to be like marked, evaluated. Someone
Mm-hmm.
else needs to see it for it to be worthwhile and useful. And actually, we can write just because it's interesting for us
It
and
can
useful for
serve
us.
as a therapy. Like I used to write every morning my in my journal or morning pages, call it whatever you want. I never reread them. I just have them there. But sometimes some of my best ideas have come from that. And probably some of my worst forgotten ideas are also written there, and no one will ever read them. And it's fine, but it's a way to express ourselves that can help you empty your brain to then refill it with new ideas, right?
Mm, absolutely. So there is one thing actually I think I'd be really interesting to think about you to ask you specifically is around the ghostwriting thing, because that's not something I've
Mm-hmm.
ever kind of looked at before. I help, when I work with people, I do often work with them to express themselves, but not by doing stuff for them, if you see what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in quite that way. what does that teach you about this whole thing, about how you should write? Because you must have to be really flexible with how you're
Mhm.
writing.
Sure. One of the big challenges when you start a ghostwriting project is actually understanding the tone of voice and nailing the way of communication of your client, because all of them are different and they will express their ideas in a different way. So that's a big challenge, and it only comes with time. um, you trial and error and you test, and if the client is happy then you nail down more into that. But it's also sometimes never meant to happen, because some clients or some people you will just not be able to communicate as they would, because they just have a completely different tone of voice, a completely different idea of life and of how you have to communicate and what all these rules mean and philosophy of life. So, and that has happened to me. And in those cases, for me, the best option is just to let it go. It's just like a partner in life, right? When you start to disagree on everything, it's just not gonna work. You might as well move on. But it is definitely a challenge that you work on daily. The thing is, once the challenge is overcome and you actually find that tone of voice, it's magical, right? Because it's so beautiful to write something in the voice of someone else and them reading it and saying, oh wow, I could have not written this better myself. You got exactly the idea I wanted to communicate, and that's just super fulfilling.
Mm. It's really interesting. I think it also makes me think, there's another link there, and this is one of the things for me thinking about the the self-expression and marketing relationship
Hmm.
is actually, people often try and polish things to the point at which not that much of them shows up in their marketing,
Hmm.
not much of them as an individual. And actually, we very often with people who are, we work best with people who are quite a lot like us.
Hmm.
And particularly if, in your case, so if you took all of the all of your style of writing out of your writing, there'd be no way for people to tell whether you were the right kind of person to write for them or not,
Hmm.
because it wouldn't resonate, you wouldn't get that resonance. So there's something really interesting for me that, I think so often we try and hide that, like remove all of the edges to this stuff. Whereas
Hmm.
actually it's a really good way for people to work out whether they want to work with us or not.
And for you also to know if you're going to be able to work for that person or not, because maybe if you're writing in this way where you are not showing all your tone of voice or your personality, they're going to think you're going to write also on that way for them, and then at the end of the day, if you don't meet those expectations, they're not going to be happy with what they get.
Mm,
So
yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's really, really fascinating as an area about how much I think a lot of people hold themselves back around this.
mhm. Yes.
So if people wanted to, yeah, I think you've mentioned morning pages and or regular writing, journaling. Are there anything else that you found really helpful in kind of working out this stuff, or being able to do some more? Because I think I know a lot of people who say I would really like to write more. I'm probably in that
Mhm.
category, honestly. Um, but it can be difficult. So what can help people just get started with this? What tips have you found are really helpful?
For me, it's like starting writing is like building any other habit. So I don't know, if you want to start drinking 2 liters of alcohol, I have alcohol of water
Yeah.
per day. Sorry.
I mean, I think there are a few authors that have done that, but I'm not sure it's not
Yes.
sure it's to be recommended.
We're not going to recommend it here.
It's
But
like if you want to write like Hemingway, then start by drinking like Hemingway. No, don't. Yeah.
don't, sorry. No, but
Um,
I meant I just said water, because drinking water, because I have it here. But if you want to get into the habit of working out in the morning, or whatever habit you want to get, in this case, so writing, you need to make it as easy as possible as you can for yourself to actually do it, right? So this is how I did it myself. You just figure out which is the moment of the day in which you're gonna have time for sure. If you don't have it, you need to find it. So just like wake up half an hour before. Like this, you can still keep at it at your day as you did before, but at least now you know you're making this half an hour for it. Get your new pens, new notebooks, or a new iPad, or however the format it is that you like to write. So make it enjoyable as an experience. I love stationery, so I love having my super nice notebook with a nice pen and sitting down with my morning coffee and just doing that. So this is what works for me. You need to figure out what actually works for you and build that environment that will help you stick to it, and then just execute and be okay with failing some days and coming back to it later is exactly the quote we said at the beginning.
I think that idea of, yeah, in like creating a situation where it's easier for you. I love that. And also not being really, not beating yourself up if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you create the situation and then see what happens rather than it being like, I need to write this much. I
Mm-hmm.
think writing to like setting yourself a target like that is a really good way of making the whole experience miserable and then making yourself not do it at all.
Yes. I don't remember which book it was, but they were talking about morning pages or building this habit of writing. And they said it's fine if one day you sit down and you write 3 pages of, I don't know what to write today. Just write that for 3 pages and then leave and go. But you will have still tried, and that's fine. You'll know what to write about tomorrow.
Mm, absolutely. I, one of the things I found actually make me think is that sometimes if I have to write a specific thing, if I have to come up with something, it actually really helps me to do other things around that. Like sometimes if I'm stuck and I can't write anything, it's because I need to do some reading or I need to like play around with the ideas and like map things out and move them around and see how they relate to one another. And if it doesn't flow, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one of the big things for me personally. So I think the other side of this, if you do have a specific goal, is that you can
Mm-hmm.
do some of this, like there's stuff around writing, like you said, creating the situation, but there's also some active stuff that can really
Mm-hmm.
help as well if the words aren't coming.
Yes. One of the big liberations I had too when I started studying copywriting was that I read, or in the course I was taking, they taught us that 90% of the work of copywriting comes with investigation. So I was, oh, I can investigate. Like, that's not putting so much pressure on myself. So I can spend 90% of my time investigating how others communicate and how to do this and etc. And then 10% is writing. Oh, that's much less pressure for
It's
myself.
much easier, and it feels much more like achievable as well. I think, yeah, and one of the funny things is that there are some very prolific writers out there in all formats, but many of the really great writers and people who've achieved incredible things with word with with writing actually didn't write that much every day. The main thing is that they wrote regularly and they did write every day, but they didn't write that much.
Mhm.
And I think we can put far too much pressure on ourselves to produce a lot.
Definitely. But sometimes it's, as I said, just showing up and getting into the zone, and then maybe not producing that day. That's gonna be fine. But at least know that whenever the inspiration come, you will have the environment that allows you to channel it and put it
Mm,
into writing.
yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's a really, really interesting one.
Hmm.
So if people are listening to this and they're like, okay, there's one thing, if there's one thing from this conversation that people don't have to do anymore, that having based on what we said, if one thing people can
Hmm.
stop worrying about, perhaps, what comes up for you?
Mm. Everything you've learned or read about writing, like just forgot about everything and do what feels right for you, because probably someone else will relate and understand where you're coming from, and that will be enough for you to consider your writing good.
That's amazing. That's such strong advice. Yeah, I think that, the idea of forget it all. Wow. Yes. That's that's incredible. Yeah. And I think the thing is we kind of I yeah, we know how to write. We know how to speak, and this is one of the things when I'm talking to people about speaking as well. It's like we can speak because we can have a
Mhm.
conversation. You know, is we're actually, I think I read something recently where actually we're one of the effects of the internet is that we are one of the most incredibly literate societies that we've ever known because we are
Mhm.
always reading and writing. We might be sending text messages or emails, but we're always reading and writing.
Yeah.
And we can do that without any problem at all
Mhm.
because we just do it. And I feel like, we can just have a conversation the same. But it suddenly becomes this other thing because we think there's more to it. There's all of these extra things you have to do. And there might be extra things you want to add to it at some point in the future. But you're right, you can get your message across to the right people just by just doing it. We know you know enough already to do it.
Mhm. For sure. And finding the confidence to do that is kind of hard, but I think that with the internet, even though it has bad things, it has good things. That is that we all have thousands of platforms where we can actually like hide a bit behind. So that can help you overcome this stage fright, as I call it.
Mm. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how people might do that? I like that idea. I think that's a really interesting one.
Sure, I had a lot of stage fright when I started publishing for my own brand on LinkedIn. I started on January, and I had all this content written down, but I couldn't bring myself to just hit publish because I was scared about what would my ex-bosses think, my family, my friends, my everyone I had in that network. So the way I found that worked for me to overcome it is to schedule the posts and just leave. So I would schedule all my posts in advance because you can do that really easy, and I think you can do that in almost any platform. And I knew the time in which they were gonna go live, and I was just not online at that time. I didn't want to know anything, like it's not even happening. But it helped me see that nothing happened. So I posted and no one really cared. Obviously, some people engaged and some people texted me like, "This is great," etc. But the world didn't collapse,
Mm.
um, and that helped me push through this initial fear for sure.
Mm. I love that. I think any way that helps you get over the barriers and get it out there, because
Hmm.
that's for me one of the things that makes it easier to do, forms a kind of positive feedback, a virtuous cycle, is when people engage around what you create.
Hmm.
That's as soon as people start being like, "Oh, I really got," I think that then generates more ideas and more thoughts and more writing or more content, doesn't it? For me, anyway, I think. But getting to the point at which that cycle starts can be really hard.
Hmm. Yes, but when it starts, as you said, it's like it feeds itself, right?
Mm,
You feed with new ideas, with new energy, with new confidence that keeps you motivated, and you just keep going.
absolutely. Yeah. No, I love that. I think that for me, particularly, you know, that idea of creating the situation where it's something you want to, where it drives itself. I think the one of the big things around content marketing is there are a lot of people telling you you should do content marketing. And
Hmm.
I've spent my entire life being told I should be writing things that I didn't really want to write in ways I didn't really want to write them.
Hmm.
And it's very easy to fall into that pattern and see it almost as like, oh, great, now I'm a grown up and I still got homework. Um, I've got a, and I think for some people it can feel like that. I think actually, the way you put it around actually making it something you want to do and you enjoy doing is the
Mhm.
best way to create stuff. First of all, that you enjoy doing. Second of all, that you'll do regularly and create enough of. And thirdly, I think that other people will actually enjoy and relate to.
Yeah. One of the things I always say is to make it sustainable, you have to make it enjoyable because otherwise you're just gonna end up quitting sooner or later. But you're gonna burn out. And if you enjoy it, people will enjoy it because if you're
Mm,
having fun, probably that will show out through the content, and people who read it will have the same fun you had. So adding humor, adding your personality is the way to do that.
absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you. I think it's such an important thing, and for me, the more people who can really express themselves and share their perspective, the better. I think it's a really good thing. The more there's, unfortunately, that there is a lot of stuff shared online that doesn't really have very much of this, that's very low in terms of value because people haven't been able to express themselves for whatever reason. I think the more we can
Mhm.
actually share our personal, our real perspectives, it's a really valuable thing to share with the world.
It will be valuable for someone out there for sure. So even if it's just one person, that's for me at least motivation enough to create that impact on that person.
Mm, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I, I really, yeah, I found that incredibly useful, and I think it's a thing I'd really urge everyone to explore doing. Whether go with writing or go with speaking or just try it, just try stuff
Hmm.
for sure. Um, and if people want to get in touch with you to explore more, um, I think we've got your website and the LinkedIn in the show notes. So what kind of things would you like people to get in touch with? Like, who would you like to reach out to you?
Yes. So what I'm doing right now is helping people who want to start create their brand on LinkedIn through the content creation. So I've developed a content creation system that allows you to create content in an easy way, removing all this friction, as we said, and getting you in an easy position where you can actually channel the ideas that come to you and then use them for your content. So that's basically what I'm helping my clients with. I also write for some of my premium clients, which is also something that you can contact me for if you want to just outsource it and me take care of it. I'll be happy to do that too. And to contact me, as you've said, through my LinkedIn, I'm there almost every day. So you can just send me a request to connect or a message, and I'll be back to you for sure.
Amazing, thank you. And I think you before we actually went live, we chatted about a couple of things that we both found helpful
Hmm.
in this space. And for me, if you're looking to understand a bit more about this, particularly from a kind of psychology and neuroscience-y perspective, um, The Sense of Style by Steven Pinker was really helpful to me in understanding the kind of why some elements of language are easier for us to understand than others, and how to write for how people's brains work instead of just following
Hmm.
these rules. But you also mentioned, I think it was On Writing by Stephen King. So what is it about
Yes.
that you found so useful?
On Writing from Stephen King is kind of a memoir and explanation of his writing process. So for me, it was particularly helpful to see someone that I consider such a good writer and such a successful writer in our era has simple processes that you can implement tomorrow morning if you'd like. So it's super well written and easy to read, and it helped me maybe demystify the writing profession and see that it's actually just a job as any other. And then when done consistently, everyone or anyone can do it.
And I think that any one bit, particularly, I, I I'm sure I'm hopefully I'm not saying so. fairly sure over Stephen King is neurodivergent himself. And I think there's, so if that's what's getting in the way of you writing, then I think it's a particularly good place
For
to
sure.
start. So yeah, thank you so much for all of that, and I really hope it's inspired everyone in the audience. But yeah, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for connecting.
Oh yeah, no, thank you. Very, very welcome for being in. Yeah, I hope everyone in the audience, it really did get you thinking and it kind of inspired you to try some, maybe actually try out, try some writing and if you want to get in touch, then do reach out and ask for sure. And also, you know, share it with someone else you think might value it, because that's how this show grows and how other people find it. So yeah, that's the single best way to support what we're doing here. Um, you can find all of the upcoming and past episodes on YouTube and LinkedIn, and also on the podcast. So share it from wherever you think people are most likely to benefit. Delightful Descent, the live recordings are going to be taking a short break whilst whilst I actually work through some of the backlog in the old episodes. So we're going to be back in the autumn with some more stuff, and we've already got some really exciting shows lined up for you. But in the meantime, yeah, please do bear with us, and there'll be stuff soon. So yeah, in the meantime, yeah, I hope to see you then in the autumn. But yeah, go out there and make some delightful descent of your own. So yeah, thanks very much and goodbye.
Bye.